It's incredible to think that it's a year now since October the 7th, 2023, and I really worry that the world is in danger of forgetting the full horror and evil that was done to Israel that day. And I remember vividly watching it unfold and seeing what Hamas was doing to totally innocent people. And I just think we should never forget that there are still innocent people, innocent hostages being held by their captors in Gaza. And, our hearts bleed for the people of Gaza, and they bleed for the people of Lebanon. But in the end, Israel is facing groups that want to exterminate Israel and the Jewish people. And I just think that a year on, we need to get back our moral clarity about it and get back the hostages.
Obviously, things have escalated in quite a few ways over the last year. Iran has been explicitly drawn in. Do you think Israel should be permitted to directly bomb Iranian nuclear weapons sites?
I don't think it's a question of anybody permitting Israel to do things. I think Israel will do what it thinks that it can and what it thinks is in the long-term interests of survival of the state of Israel. I think as it happens that for a very long time, we in the West have slightly depended on Israel to take certain steps to restrict the Iranian access to nuclear weapons and nuclear technology. And if Israel does that again, it may be unconventional, it may be illegal. Is it something that I would weep hot tears about? No.
So a different perspective there to Biden, which is interesting. What about Prime Minister Netanyahu? You've met him many times. Did you always trust him fully?
I think that Benjamin Netanyahu's agenda is the security of the state of Israel, and obviously projecting himself as the guarantor, as the political guarantor of that security. I think that everybody, that was clearly badly shaken by what happened on October the 7th a year ago. But it is entirely understandable that any Israeli prime minister is going to want to take steps to prevent that kind of atrocity, 1,200 innocent people murdered, prevent it from happening again.
From one leader to another, President Zelensky, where do you rank him in terms of the great leaders of the last 100 years?
I think when you look at Volodymyr Zelensky, his towering achievement has been not just to keep his own country going through an incredibly dark period and to give the Ukrainians the inspirational leadership that they need. What he has done is he has recruited the rest of the world, or a huge proportion of the rest of the world, and above all, the United States of America. And in that respect, there really is a Churchillian comparison. Like Winston Churchill during the Second World War, whose arguably most important strategic achievement was to get America to come in and make sure that the forces of democracy and freedom prevailed.
Did you help get America to come in? In terms of backing Ukraine?
Look, I think that the UK position was always very strongly pro-Ukrainian when I was Prime Minister, remains strongly pro-Ukrainian. I think that we were able to make some arguments that Joe Biden was certainly more than willing to understand and to follow up on. And I think I really pay tribute to Joe and to the US administration for what they've done so far.
Obviously, US permission for Western weapons to be used by Ukraine into Russian territory hasn't been forthcoming. If you were PM today, would you give Zelensky permission to use UK weapons in that way, regardless?
I would, if it was technically possible to give him the ability to do what he needs to do. I mean, I can't speak for the exact technical restraints there may be, but the UK should be out in front. The UK should be breaking the taboos, breaking the ice, leading on this. And that's what we did over the NLAWs, the shoulder-launched anti-tank weapons that we gave at the end of 2021, arriving as they did in the nick of time in January 2022. And all the time you can see that it has paid off for us to be out in the lead.
Wanted to talk about the withdrawal from Afghanistan. The section in the book in that is fascinating. You describe it as a total moral, political and strategic defeat for the West. Some have questioned whether the fault of it fell on the Doha deal struck by Trump in 2020, but you conclude it was really Joe Biden's fault.
Look, I think what the proponents of the Doha deal in 2020 would say was that that deal had all sorts of conditions attached for what the Taliban had to do in order to allow a Western withdrawal, a NATO withdrawal to take place. And plainly, the Taliban did not fulfill those conditions. They did not stop their attacks. They did not stop their advance. And so, yeah, look, it's no secret, and you'll know this very well, the UK military and the US military were extremely alarmed by the idea of us pulling out in the way that they did, because they thought that it might lead to exactly what happened. Now, a lot of our guys in the defence establishment thought that perhaps the Afghan army might hold out, they might fight on, but I'm afraid it was very, very sad.
You write when Biden confirmed that he would pull out, the stage was set for disaster. At another section, you write that Putin thought he could get away with invading Ukraine because of Western feebleness.
I'm afraid that's true. So you've got to look at the sequence of events from 2013 onwards, when, you remember in 2013, when the Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad uses chemical weapons against his own people. And we have said, the Democratic administration in Washington, we have said in London that we will take reprisals against Assad if he does it. We did nothing. Well, we certainly didn't.
Afghanistan withdrawal.
And then what happens is Putin invades Ukraine in 2014. He invades the Donbass and Crimea. And I think, having got away with that, I think when it came to the Afghan withdrawal at the end of, in the middle of September 2021, and then I just think he thought we wouldn't take sides in the way that we did.
It's interesting that you've listed three big moments there, and the Democrats were in power for all three. You suggested to The Telegraph that Putin would not have invaded Ukraine if Trump was still in power. So do you think Putin sees Biden as weaker than Trump? I
have no idea what Putin's calculations may or may not be. What I would say, is that, as I said just now, I think that Joe Biden and the White House did an outstanding job, when it was clear that Ukraine faced an existential threat
in response. But were they part of the Western feebleness that you say enabled the invasion?
Well, I certainly think that we didn't do enough to deter Putin in the way that we could have. That flowed from 2014 onwards.
And what about today?
And what we should have done, is what we should do now. The only practical way to fix this thing is to get Ukraine into NATO, and to get those parts of Ukraine that are controlled by Ukraine into NATO, as you can do under Article 6 of the Washington Treaty. And you see, that for Putin, that would be game over, because he's not going to attack territory that has an Article 5 NATO guarantee. And we should give that guarantee to as much of Ukraine as we can, and to start to take the kind of the heat out of this thing, because at the moment Putin still thinks that if he keeps going, he can get Ukraine. We've got to show him that that's not true. That we're invested in the future security of Ukraine.
On a slightly different topic, obviously Keir Starmer suspended some weapons exports to Israel. You talked about Western feebleness enabling aggression. Is that feeble?
Look, I just think it's incoherent. I mean, I wouldn't have done anything like it myself. I don't see what it achieves. Israel is facing an existential threat. They've had a huge bombardment of ballistic missiles from Tehran. They've had Hamas trying to massacre as many people as they possibly can. They get Hezbollah attacking them. Why are we now the first? This is the first government in UK history to announce that we're having an arms embargo of Israel. I mean, how can you say that we're standing shoulder to shoulder with Israel? It sounds, it's the opposite. We're saying we're shoulder to shoulder with Israel's enemies.
Moving on to domestic policy and Brexit. My question isn't so much has it been a success or a failure, or whether it will one day be a great success. Today, as we stand now, could it have been better than it has been?
I think people must look at Unleashed, and they must judge for themselves. And in Unleashed, they will find a story about belief in Britain and belief in our ability to do things differently and sometimes maybe a bit better thanks to Brexit. And the cardinal example that I pick out is that vaccine rollout, which saved lives and allowed a faster economic recovery than we would otherwise have had. And that was made possible by Brexit because we were able to license those vaccines faster. And, it's very hard to imagine a more graphic object lesson in the merits of national freedom and independence than the one that I saw personally during the pandemic.
Some would argue that isn't as clear, but either way, it wasn't part of the campaign. And if the best example of a success of Brexit only came because we had a pandemic,
No. So it's because we had So if you remember, during the debates on Brexit, there were several votes were had on whether or not we should remain in the European Medicines Agency, and Keir Starmer, Theresa May, and others were in favour of us staying in, because that was part of staying in the single market. And that was we had 3 years of paralysis. You will find it all in these pages. And by having the type of exit that we did, of Brexit that we did from the European, we took back control, and we had control over our regulations. And that made a huge difference. You say that people might disagree with that. I don't find anybody who disagrees.
Well, the 2012 Human Medicines Regulation does state that requirement for authorization on vaccine doesn't apply in cases of emergency in response to things like pathogenic agents. But people didn't vote for Brexit for vaccines.
They voted for freedom.
One area they did vote for was on immigration and to separate from freedom of movement. Do you think they expected to see immigration go down, not up?
Well, it did go down massively during the pandemic.
Well, that's for different reasons.
And what happened was that we then had if you remember, we then had a massive labour shortage. We couldn't get anybody to stack the shelves. We couldn't get anybody to drive the fuel trucks. And so the Migration Advisory Committee decided that it'd be a good idea to have hang on, let me finish, because this is why immigration went up.
But forgive me, Mr. Johnson, for interrupting, because the 3-year average before Brexit was 279,000 per year. The 3-year average since Brexit, since your point system was introduced, which is what the agency uses as its guide, 632,000. You can point to 1 year there where inflation had an effect in the middle, but not the overall averages. So again, I just step back and say, broadly speaking, immigration has gone up a lot since Brexit when people expected it to come down.
But we have it. The point is that we now it went up because we were desperately short of labour, and I think in retrospect it went up far too much, and that was a decision taken by the Migration Advisory Committee on the basis of all the advice they were getting. When it comes to stuff like the cross-channel illegal traffic, the ruthless abuse of people by the people traffic, Brexit allows you to do things like the Rwanda policy, which I think it's a great shame that has now been abandoned by the current government in favour of a deal with Albania.
We shall
see.
What's
the difference in Albania and Rwanda?
The Rwanda plan you announced well before it was operational anyway. But let's move on and talk.
But I said at the time that it was going to be extremely difficult to operationalise because
which was an understatement
of lefty lawyers like the present Prime Minister. But it's the right way forward.
Let's talk about Partygate. People have seen the interviews you've given already in the last couple of days, and the theme in the book is similar, which you seem to have rowed back a little bit the extent of your past apologies on Partygate.
Let me explain again.
You apologise in the book. You regret the nature of the grovelling apologies. Your quote, and you.
So the reason
and
for
you
that,
suggest they made you seem more culpable than you were.
That's right.
My question is, do you accept though that people were enormously upset by Partygate?
So yes, of course, and so that's why I apologise and continue to apologise for things that we got wrong. The problem with issuing a great big blanket, the point I'm making in Unleashed, is that by issuing a great big blanket apology at the get-go, before anybody really knew what had happened or what was true or wasn't true, was that reasonably enough in the public imagination, it looked as though I was accepting every single allegation that was subsequently made. And I wasn't. I didn't mean to do that. And that was very unfortunate and very unfair on a lot of officials who were actually working incredibly hard to do things like the furlough programme, vaccine rollout, and everything else, because some of the stuff, sadly, that was said about them was just not true. And I repeat the point, anybody who thinks that people in Number 10 were setting out to break the rules and have parties, I think is really out of their minds.
You got a fine from the police, 126 other fines of your staff in Downing Street. So clearly there was significant rule breaking. I take it one further in terms of the tone of the sections in the book on this. At times, you seem to mock the public for how closely they followed the rules. You write, the real question, I suppose, is why...
I totally
let me read this line.
I totally reject that.
You write, why on earth the public so avidly craved these rules, why they were so willing to have their doings circumscribed in such rabbinical detail. You go on to say the rules for people were, quote...
So I'm talking about a particular phase in the, and I totally reject what you just said, but I talk about a particular phase during the pandemic when, we had come out, so we'd gone through the first lockdown. We were coming towards the autumn of 2020. It seemed reasonable as we went into the autumn to try to have a tiered approach and to try to manage the disease by saying to various,
I get those
geographical areas, you're going into tier 3, you're going into tier 2, and so on. Now, I marvelled at the way in which the public were, at least at first, willing to try to absorb these rules in all their detail. And it was, and I pay tribute to them. The difficulty was that the tiering system was just impossible to make work properly.
What do you mean when you say the real question, I suppose, is why on earth the publicly so avidly craved these rules? I don't think anybody craved these rules, did they?
Well, I think you're wrong. I think that they did, and I think that if you look historically at the way pandemics work.
You were the one that told people you must stay home.
I know. Well,
they didn't want these rules.
Well, you say that, but that's very interesting. Well, because you might belong to a group of a large group of people, an honourable group of people, who think that the rules went too far, and who think that lockdowns were too prescriptive. But
the people
I can assure you,
were like a kind of religion. They followed the rules, detailed rituals. They obeyed Leviticus-like in the hope of salvation. It does sound like you have some disdain for the people that followed the rules to the letter.
Well, there's your words. Okay, those are your words, and I totally reject that. But if you look at the way people historically have responded to pandemics, and I remember Chris Whitty talking to me about this right at the beginning, people want government to come in and lay down the law. When you have the horror and the mystery of an invisibly transmitted infection, and you have no other means of controlling it except to restrict human contact, because we had no vaccine, we had no medicines for it at that stage, people do want government to explain how that's going to happen. And they do want restrictions on human contact. So if you look at the plague in early modern
I get
England,
that, but given that, and given how you're framing what some people wanted more than others, and how they then followed the rules, 126 fines in Downing Street, with some coverage suggesting you're withdrawing an apology for it. Here and now, clarify if you are sorry to those people.
Of course,
yeah.
Of course. So but I was just trying to make a point about my officials, what they were doing, and I say in Unleashed, I try to explain that I made many mistakes in the handling of that story, and what became, quite a running story. And there were things I should have done. I appointed Sue Gray, who then turned out to be the Chief of Staff, the leader of the Labour Party.
When you saw that she lost her job yesterday?
R.I.P.
Is there a wry smile on your face?
No, look, I think what I would say is that at the time that I asked her to do that particular job, she was presented to me as a model of political impartiality and probity. And, I'm not certain about either of those things now. So,
but you don't think she was corrupt when she was
carrying out
party
I think, you're younger, fitter journalists from Sky TV, well, I'm sure onto this, but I thought it was always looking a bit dodgy. Her position was probably going to be untenable ever since it emerged that her son had taken money from Wahid Ali and that she'd then given Wahid Ali a pass to number 10. I thought that was probably going to end in the way that it has.
And you're slightly content that it has?
Look, that's, to be honest, I think that is trivial by comparison with the things that Labour is getting wrong. And from handing over the Chagos Islands, pointlessly putting up taxes, they are making huge mistakes right now.
With 5 minutes left, I wanted to touch on a broad point about how you governed. You won a massive election victory in 2019, but it was a parliamentary election, not a presidential one. And I wonder whether, given some of the passages in the book, you look back and you think you slightly operated in a presidential way? Yeah,
look, I think there's all sorts of criticisms that you could fairly level. I think that it was always going to be tougher than I expected to be a Conservative Prime Minister after 11, 12, 13 years of Tory government, right? Because the Tory backbenches, as you know, as a seasoned political observer, they become saturated with people who feel maybe a bit discontented about their political lot. And then, yes, it's true that we had a very, very difficult time because of COVID, and I couldn't get to see the backbenchers in the way that I wanted. So I was often...
but you say as well, I was complacent and I bitterly regret it when talking. So that was on you?
Yeah. So I thought, here's my mistake. I thought, look, even in July 2022, I thought, we got an 80-seat majority. I'm only a couple of points behind in the polls. The Reform Party was on 0, right? The Reform Party, which was then to
I checked, they were on 4.
Well, they were at or around 0 for most of my time as Prime Minister. I think I saw they were on 2, but they were on at or around 0.
But these, with the greatest respect, this is one of the few areas where you really come out and explain the loss. These are excuses around the edges. You also wrote, I'm afraid at times I was arrogant. I should have realised how different being Prime Minister is from being Mayor. Ultimately, not looking after your MPs, was that your mistake?
Yeah, but one of the problems was that we had, as I've been describing, we had lockdown, which was making it very difficult to get and see MPs in the normal way that you You do. So for 18 months, there were long periods where I couldn't see them. And so I think that, yeah, so if you ask me, did they make a goof? Yes, I think that they did. And do I think we would have won in 2024 if I'd stayed on? Yes, I do. Because Starmer wasn't setting the world on fire. We were a tiny bit behind in the polls. Reform was nowhere. And, you know, I won the mayoralty in London when we were 15 points behind nationally. So I would have put money on myself to campaign.
For the things you didn't deliver, I mean, levelling up is one of the areas you're clearly passionate about. Do you regret that you made mistakes that led to you not being able to deliver levelling up, or do you blame it on others?
So I think the mistake was sadly, was that I couldn't stay on to complete the 2019 mandate.
It's been a crazy period of time being in government. Your professional life was all over the place, I guess. At the same time, in your private life, you fell in love, you got married, you started a new family. Was it ultimately a very happy time for you?
Look, I've had a very lucky life, and I'm, you know, as you have. Let's be frank. And I'm fortunate in my job, and the things I've been able to do. I was just frustrated that a project that was about believing in Britain, and which I think is the right thing for this country, was truncated. And the reason I wrote Unleashed is because I want people to understand what I was trying to do, and I want people to understand, whatever their politics may be, that it remains, I think, the right thing for this country. Because this country has enormous potential. And in this book is a really very positive message about what Britain can do.
Mr. Johnson, thank you for your time.
Thank you.